That's who they really are. Not the defendant that wears a bow tie to court at his trial, or the defendant that has the three-piece suit, or the defendant wearing the turtleneck in front of you, sitting here quietly. This is who they are. This is their real character. This is who they are.
I'll object comment about the character proper.
Overruled. Sorry.
This is their character. Killers that within 24 hours after shooting the victim dead and stealing $50,000 from him, this is what they do. Look at how happy they look. Look at how excited they look to have this money as they're showing it off repeatedly. And I didn't even put all the videos in this slide. You have it evidence. It's dozens of videos. Look at his face, how happy he looks. It's okay, you can look at him. You see him there now. This is who he is. And I submit to you, this is real money. It's common sense, it's real money. Look at it, how crisp it looks. Like it just came from a Bank of America, dispensed earlier that morning. Look at how the bills are all facing each other. As if Cecilia Ramos had just run it through the counter. And all of the bills happen to be facing the same way and folded in the same way. Those are things that you can take into account as you're looking at and considering, was this really what they did? And I submit to you, it absolutely 1,000% is what they did. The other thing to pay attention to with these videos, you'll recall the Driftwood surveillance shows, and this is something that defense counsel for example, Mr. Newsom admitted as much. He says that he was in the car after the fact because of the crash ticket. And so the surveillance video shows two people. It shows two people leaving the Dodge Journey just after the homicide. And again, remember I was saying to you, Michael Boatwright and Trayvon Newsom were together the entire time. No obvious stops that Trayvon Newsom was picked up or dropped off. And so here they are. Taking the suspect vehicle, parking it way up the street for no other reason other than they just committed a homicide in that car and they don't want it to be detected in front of Robert Allen's home. And what do we see them? As Trayvon Newsom is look at what they're wearing. Look at what they're wearing. Look at the height difference. Trayvon Newsom in the white t-shirt, just like he is here, flashing the money. Here and here. Same ripped jeans. Same hat. Same black shirt Michael Boatwright has on there with the Champion logo that you can see even from the vantage point right there. It's the same. And this evidence, by the way, when we talk about does the testimony and the evidence agree with each other, this is what Robert Allen testified about. He said that this is what they did. You don't have to take his word for it. You can see it on the surveillance from the Driftwood. And you can see it consistent with videos from Michael Boatwright's phone. There they are. She's from ear to ear, so happy. You will get an opportunity. I'm going to talk to you again. I'm going to be talking to you before I sit down. about what you'll get when you're in the back deliberating. Okay, so besides the evidence that you're going to get to review and talk amongst yourselves, you're going to get verdict forms. And this is what they look like. You're going to get one verdict form per defendant per count. So that's 2 verdict forms, 6 total for each defendant. Okay? And so it looks just like this. The pertinent parts. The first one is for count 1. And remember, the state is asking you to vote guilty for the highest count charge, which is first-degree murder. You're going to get the options like we talked about the lessers. It's going to be on the verdict form here as B and C. But based on the evidence that has been presented to you, I submit to you that the state has met its burden as to each element beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt that the defendant, Dietrich Williams, is guilty of first-degree murder. And so, remember, during jury selection, I actually asked row by row. Each row, I asked if the state presented all the evidence and met its burden, could you vote guilty of first-degree murder? It wasn't a question that was just in futility or hypothetical. This is now real. The state is asking you to vote guilty of first-degree murder. And I asked you in jury selection if you could do that, because now's the time that we presented the evidence to you, proving to you that Dietrich Williams is guilty of first-degree murder. And now is the time when you go back there and deliberate, you're going to see this verdict form. I'm asking for you to check that box that he's guilty. You will also get a verdict form for count 2 for armed robbery. You're going to get all the options that we talked about, the lesser included offenses. But I'm asking you to vote the highest offense charged in the indictment, which is guilty of armed robbery, because that's what we've proven. Trayvon Newsome, you'll get a verdict form for him for count 1. And his is going to look a little slightly different. It's going to have all the options for first-degree murder and the lessers, but you'll also have a question at the end. And so, just the same, we're asking you to vote guilty, that Trayvon Newsome is guilty of first-degree murder, which is the first option, so check that option. But then you'll also get the opportunity to ask yourselves, during the course of the crime committed, did Trayvon Newsome actually possess a firearm? That's a question of fact for you to consider, and I submit to you the answer is yes. Not only did you hear testimony that he had a revolver, but also it makes common sense. You're not going to jump out of a car to commit a robbery with a weapon in your hand. That's a common sense approach as well. And so, consistent with testimony and what you've seen is that he had the firearm in his hand, and that's what you heard from all of the witnesses, eyewitnesses, by the way. They said that the second person, the shorter of the two, also had a firearm in their hand. And so I submit to you that you can check that box as yes. That he also had a firearm in his hand. Now, for count 2, I submit to you that Trayvon Newsome is also guilty of armed robbery. And so we're asking you to check the first option, which is guilty of armed robbery. And also during the course of the crime committed, to answer this question, yes, he actually possessed a firearm as well. So you're going to answer that question twice, for count 1 and for count 2. You'll then get the opportunity to fill out Michael Boatwright's verdict form, and his is going to look slightly different from the other two. First, we're asking you to vote that he's guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment, because that's the highest crime charged, and I submit to you we've proven it by all the evidence so far that we've talked about. So to check that option as guilty. Then, during the course of the crime committed, did Michael Boatwright actually possess a firearm? There's going to be 3 questions for you to answer. 1, did he actually possess it? Yes. That's what the testimony shows. That's what the evidence shows, the surveillance. Also, circumstantially, look at all the ammo he had matching to the actual firearm. There's testimony putting him as the shooter by Robert Allen is corroborated by all the eyewitness testimony saying that the taller of the two, of all of the co-defendants, was the gunman that shot the victim. So he possessed that firearm. Did he discharge that firearm? Yes. There's 4 missing ammo from that box that was found in front of his home. All connected to the firearm, all connected, which is the murder weapon in this case. And so the second question, I'm asking you to answer yes. The third question, during the course of the crime committed, did defendant Michael Boatwright actually inflict death on José Onfoy as a result of discharging that firearm? Yes. He's the shooter. I've made no bones about it from the beginning. He's the one that discharged that .22 caliber rifle. And everybody had said the tallest of the gunmen. I hope that you looked when we were on break. He's the tallest out of all of them and has been identified as the shooter. And so it's his weapon that actually killed José Onfoy. You'll get an opportunity to deliberate as to the second verdict for Michael Boatwright. I ask that you also vote him guilty of armed robbery as charged in the indictment. Answering the same questions again. Did Michael Boatwright actually possess the firearm? Yes, for the reasons that we've stated. During the course of it, did he discharge that firearm? Yes. And the third, yes, a resounding yes, that by the discharge of that firearm, that death was inflicted on José Onfoy. I think that when you are deliberating and you are able to review everything and think about the credibility of the witnesses, the quality of the evidence that you've seen, you're going to go back there and you're going to think about these final thoughts. This is as to Dietrich Williams. Not only was he a principal, he was the driver. Tenell Carter's testimony corroborates all of the other evidence identifying him. Robert Allen's testimony is also corroborated by all the other evidence you've heard. He tries to get Tenell Carter to change his testimony. Tells Tenell Carter that he was at Riva. He admits that to her. His DNA is on the mask, one of the 2 masks. He's flashing money immediately after the homicide. The live .22 from the murder weapon matches the fired projectiles from the victim and also matches the ammo found at Michael Boatwright's home. His post-Miranda interview with Detective Curcio, where he lies and changes his story 3 times. He lies about Riva first being there than saying he is. And his cell phone location data putting him on scene during all the pertinent times. That he's guilty. You're going to, I believe, I submit to you, find that Dietrich Williams is guilty of first-degree murder and guilty of armed robbery. As to Trayvon Newsom, he's a principal. He's flashing money immediately after the homicide. His videos are found on his co-defendant's phone, placing him with them on the day of the homicide and during the homicide. The text message about burying the money. Robert Allen's testimony, putting him as the second gunman. Tenell Carter's testimony, when she identified him as being with the co-defendants during that time. He's the second gunman. Remember that consciousness of guilt. He's the only one that threatened a sworn witness that was in front of you. Surveillance footage places him with the co-defendants. The Driftwood surveillance footage. The threats to Robert Allen, the intimidation, and he's ticketed for the car crash that also puts him during that time. So he's also guilty of first-degree murder and of armed robbery. Michael Boatwright, he's the shooter. The .22 Gila bullets match the fired projectiles from the victim's autopsy and the live 22 from his co-defendant's home. Tony Robinson's testimony as well puts him as picking up the car, you'll recall. He picks up the Dodge Journey with Robert Allen. Tennille Carter also identifies him as being with the co-defendants during this time. In addition to being a shooter, he's a principal as well to his co-defendants. His DNA is on the mask. All the evidence proves that he was a shooter and not at his grandmother's house gingerly sleeping. The fired casings on scene and the fired projectiles from the autopsy match the murder weapon. Robert Allen's testimony also is corroborated by all of this and puts him as the shooter. His location data places him on scene the entire time. His Bluetooth connectivity also has him on scene and connected there. He never left the homicide scene. He's also guilty of first-degree murder and of armed robbery. I'm going to get a second opportunity to speak to you after all of the defense counsel has had an opportunity to talk to you. And I ask you to please, as you have been so graciously paying attention to all the details that have been discussed and the evidence that's been presented to you, think about the things that we've talked about so far. I know I've been standing up here talking for a long time, but think about these things as you listen to the additional arguments and keep that common sense approach and keep that in mind, that these defendants are guilty of the two offenses that we have charged them with. And I'll wrap up when I get that second opportunity to talk to you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 1:15. I think it'd be a good time to take a break. Clear your heads a little bit, relax.